Good morning, everyone. I'm Susan Demas, the executive editor here at Lincoln Square, and welcome to the weekly assignment where executive producer Sam Osterhout and I talk to you about what's coming up this week on Lincoln Square, the latest headlines, and what we can all do to fight back against authoritarianism. Hey, Sam, how are you?
I'm good. And you?
Doing pretty good.
Mhm.
So it was a pretty eventful weekend, especially for some of our colleagues in the press. We had the White House Correspondents Dinner, where, where we kind of left it last week was, why are we honoring someone who is not a fan of the free press, which would, kind of be a charitable take on it?
Yeah.
But it devolved into absolute chaos. There was a gunman there, and he has since been arrested. He has released a manifesto where he was talking about a lot of his critiques of the Trump administration, other officials, his despair over the Epstein files. So, Sam, what do you make of all this?
There's a lot here. And I think that, Frank Figluzzi has published a piece, I think today on Lincoln Square, about, immediately following this, everyone was like, this is a false flag, this is so on and so forth. And I think that there's something bigger at work here with this. Of course, we think it's a false flag because everything is equally untrue in this administration. Right. This is a sort of Soviet move, old Soviet, and Putin uses this too, called hypernormalization, where everything is equally untrue. You assume, you go about your business believing that nothing is actually right or real, and you have no hope of finding reality or of solving this problem. And so I think you have that. And then you also have Trump, who is a real super spreader of violence, right? And of violent rhetoric. And so you have all of these ingredients, and this is the world that we inhabit now. And I think it's I'm so glad that no one was hurt. I'm grateful that the suspect was taken into custody rather than killed, so that we can maybe get more information and seek to understand. But this is a symptom of a really sick nation.
Yeah, I think what really concerns me is that we definitely have seen an uptick in political violence. We had the former House Speaker in Minnesota who was killed with her husband last summer. It seems like so much has happened since then. Her name was Melissa Hortman. And we've seen so many other public figures have been subject to violent threats or outright violence over the years. And this is part of a larger problem. I mean, those of us who are parents, one of our big fears in sending our kids off to school every day is that you never know if violence might come home in their school district, because it has in so many. You worry if you send them to go to the mall or any kind of public place, because in America, gun violence is really common. And so now that we're in a period where, I think Donald Trump deserves to take some credit for this, where the rhetoric is so incredibly heightened. We're seeing an uptick in political violence, but it's not isolated. There's gun violence everywhere in America. And it also concerns me as a longtime member of the media that we also seem to be just absolutely drowning in conspiracy theories.
Yes.
I think, Trump, as you pointed out, is just a super spreader of misinformation and
violent rhetoric as well.
Violent rhetoric as well. But, as a result, I think a lot of people are just questioning if anything is true anymore. And it's increasingly difficult to kind of keep your finger on the pulse of reality, especially there are so many AI images out there. I mean, think about the images coming out of the Iran war. half of the images are from past wars or video games. I mean, a lot of us just really are drowning in misinformation. And it's just been this toxic stew since, that really horrible, few minutes that we all saw live on television at this dinner.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that, look, Hegseth at the Pentagon prays to God that bullets find their mark, right? This is an administration, a nation, and really a society. And I think we all need to sort of own up to this in our own little way, that is leaning on violence as a political solution for almost everything. And in fact, I think that democracy is the alternative to political violence, right? Because if you have a monarchy, how do you get rid of a king? Well, there's one really good way, right? Right? But you don't vote him out. So we developed this whole system so we didn't have to do any of this shit. And it makes me so mad that we are that we have returned to sort of normalizing political violence as our primary driver of politics. And I think that also is a good transition into the war, because Trump has, the war powers situation coming up on Friday, May 1st. This war is ultimately illegal, but as of May 1st, it will definitely be illegal. And they're not going to do anything about it. I really don't think anything's going to happen. I think that they're going to continue talking about, the solution for violence will be building a ballroom bunker that they can have, peaceful parties in and drink champagne without fear. That's their solution. And then we'll all forget about this war and the plight of the people who are being killed every day.
Right. And we saw, I think we have a clip of Trump saying that we're not going to continue with peace talks because the travel time is too much to Pakistan.
You heard from Pakistan. The Iran foreign minister was in Pakistan yesterday night.
I think Pakistan is terrific. I think the field marshal is fantastic. I think the prime minister of Pakistan is great. And, they'd like to see something happen, but we're not going to be traveling 15, 16 hours to have a meeting with people that nobody ever heard of.
What changed to make you make that decision?
Too much travel. When they say the meeting's scheduled for Tuesday, I said, Tuesday, that's a long time from now. But when you get right down to it, it's a lot of traveling. No, we don't want to do that.
At what point do you say?
We really are living in absurdist times when we're talking about trying to end a war that clearly Trump would like an off-ramp from. But we're now using the excuse that it takes a lot of time to travel to these places, as we know, because, we are in the midst of a regional war that we've started in the Middle East. And that Trump and Republicans have taken a shooting at a private event, a White House Correspondents Dinner, and said, well, therefore, we must definitely build this ballroom tribute to Trump. Like, one has nothing to do with the other. And everybody's been in lockstep on the Republican side making the case for this. And I just have to wonder how, people who are not political junkies, how they're processing this, where, they haven't even made the case as to how having this ballroom built would have prevented anything at a private hotel for a private function. It's just absurdist. And I think that so many people who are just watching the endless shit show that this Trump administration has been, I think it's incredibly depressing, and people just want a way out of this.
I think that, the war resolution, his like, it's too far to travel excuse is really just another way of saying this is too hard. And that's been the baseline for every policy and every action that he's ever taken as president. It's just too hard. Like, it's too, yes, the government is too complicated. It was really too hard to figure it out. So let's have Doge just fire everyone. Right. It's too hard. All of this is too hard. And also saying it is too hard is so anti-American, right? It goes against our lived self-identity over the course, self-identity. It doesn't mean it's true, right? We always do easy things, for sure, but we at least viewed ourselves as a people who accept big challenges and do big things, and not anymore. Now, instead of saying, look, gun violence is a really difficult issue, we need to figure out how to solve it. He's like, let's build a ballroom and it'll just be safe. But who's keeping my children safe?
Right.
And also, I don't want them to have to go to school in a stupid bunker. I want them to have a wonderful experience at their school and become smart and engaged and engrossing human beings when they grow up. But you know what? It's too hard.
Right. What about the people of Minneapolis who couldn't send their children to school for months on end because ICE agents would come and terrorize, families there? What about their freedom? What about the freedom of children just to be able to grow up without fear of a gunman entering their classroom? We really don't do those big things anymore. And I think that's a really sobering point, Sam. I think before we talk about some of the constructive things that we can do, like voting and protecting our voting process with our guest, who is from Verified Voting, Pam Smith. We do have to play this one clip. Nora O'Donnell is one of the big faces of this White House Correspondents Dinner. She was out there, mugging for the camera. CBS News, of course, was at the center of all this because it's Trump's new favorite news network, thanks to David Ellison, making the news network much more MAGA friendly. So she landed a very important interview with the president following the shooting at the dinner. And she, I guess, had the nerve to read from the gunman's manifesto, and the president did not care for that.
He also wrote this: I'm no longer willing to permit a pedophile, rapist, and traitor to coat my hands with his crimes. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I was waiting for you to read that because I knew you would, because you're horrible people, horrible people. Yeah, he did write that. I'm not a rapist. I didn't rape anybody.
Do you think he was referring to you?
Excuse me. I'm not a pedophile. You read that crap from some sick person. I got associated with all stuff that has nothing to do with me. I was totally exonerated. Your friends on the other side of the plate are the ones that were involved with, let's say, Epstein or other things. But I said to myself, I'll do this interview and they'll probably, I read the manifesto, he's a sick person, but you should be ashamed of yourself reading that, because I'm not any of those things.
Mr. President,
and
these are
never,
the gunman's words.
Excuse me. You shouldn't be reading that on 60 Minutes. You're a disgrace. But go ahead, let's finish the interview.
What a weak human being.
I was really struck by the fact that we've been dealing with Trump as a political figure since 2015. And it seems like the mainstream media still has not figured out how to deal with him. Mm-mm. I mean, she seemed befuddled by his reaction. And Nora O'Donnell, for whatever criticism, that I may have of her, is a seasoned journalist and has interviewed, figures from around the world for decades. And yet this probably, Donald Trump is an open book when it comes to how he's going to react when he is attacked and when he's dealing with the media. And yet she seemed just at a loss to how to deal with the fact that she was being told that she was horrible to her face and how to regain control of this interview.
Yeah, you put it that way, and it's something. The befuddlement, I think, is a big part of this story, because his reaction is not. It was the reaction that we all knew he was going to give, but she was, I feel like a lot of reporters don't ask hard questions because they don't like being called jerks, or they don't like being insulted or that kind of thing. And I don't know what to tell you. Maybe you need to go into a different line of work.
Yeah. It was an interesting moment when she's like, well, he didn't say it was about you, and just kind of like catching him there. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
He was clearly extremely defensive. But I mean, we've talked about this, Sam, that there definitely is a section of the population that, and some of them are MAGA, that are really disturbed by these Epstein allegations and the fact that the Trump Department of Justice has not acted transparently. They haven't followed the law. Nobody's been brought to justice. And I do think that this goes to a larger crisis that a lot of us are feeling in America, where there is no accountability. And unfortunately, some people have decided to take the law into their own hands, like this gunman. And when you have a culture where it's so easy to get a gun, where political violence is being normalized, it really does make you concerned about the times that we're living in. And
yeah, well, look, I think it all goes back to this entire conversation. I think the shooting or the potential shooting at the Correspondents' Dinner, the war in Iraq, all of this, it goes back to how we perceive and promote violence in the country over democratic norms.
right.
And I think that's actually a good transition to bring in our guest, who is fighting for democratic norms. And the accountability piece, you don't hold people accountable through violence. It's just not how any of this should work. You hold them accountable at the ballot box, through the legal system. That we have these mechanisms. You don't go to a place and shoot anyone. That's not how we do it.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and bring in Pam Smith, who's the CAO of Verified Voting, and the organization is dedicated to strengthening democracy for all voters by promoting the responsible use of technology in elections. Pam, thank you for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me. Oh, this conversation is rich already.
Yeah, these are heady times, but
Yeah.
Can you just talk with us about the state of voting rights right now in America as we're heading into such a crucial midterm election?
Yeah. The thing you touched on just last is about accountability. I think that's what elections are all about. They're based on evidence. What's not based on evidence? The insistence that mail ballots are fraudulent in nature. The insistence that non-citizens are voting in large numbers. And the repetition of these debunked claims of malfeasance in past elections, even when those things have been thrown out in court. Here's the thing about that. If you never have to prove your claims, because all you have to do is issue another claim or another executive order, and then another, and then another, it's easy for people to become overwhelmed by that.
Mm-hmm.
But that chaos is kind of the point. Really, I think Americans love voting and they love elections because elections are about accountability. We've always cherished the ideal that if you don't like them, you can vote them out, right? If you don't like what they're doing, vote them out. This kind of challenge to our elections and to our democratic systems has been going on for some time, but it's really accelerated now. The good news is that elections are a process of continuous improvement, and they have been continuously improving for quite a few years. Back in 2017, elections were declared part of critical infrastructure. And that meant that they could get a lot of help and support on things like cybersecurity from the federal government. And that improved the cybersecurity posture and the security posture generally of elections for elections jurisdictions across the country. That's gone away now, but the gains have not gone away. And election officials are far more ready than they ever were. Another thing that's changed, and I think this is really crucial, is that the whole country, except for Louisiana, and they're in progress, is voting on paper now. So there is a recountable, auditable, physical record. That ballot is a physical record of the intent of voters. That's evidence in any election. That gets used in an audit or a recount, even if you do your initial count by machine, which almost all jurisdictions do. So we're way ahead of where we were a dozen years ago, where at least a quarter of the country was voting on fully paperless equipment. And most jurisdictions now are doing some kind of regular post-election audit, or they have a recount law, or they have both. Are those always perfect? No, they're not always perfect, but elections are run by humans, and humans are not perfect. But election officials are among the people who never say it's too hard, ever. So they need our support. You know who else never says it's too hard? Voters. Voters who have fought for their right to be heard, sometimes over decades, sometimes over generations. And so showing up and voting is one of the key things we can do in these crazy times with all the chaos.
I've worked elections before, and I was always struck by the orchestration of all of it. And, I had to go to classes, and I had to get trained up, and, we did mock ballots, and we did the whole thing. And I sat next to a Republican, and we got to chit chat all day, throughout the entire election. And it occurred to me that everyone ought to have to do that. We all need, right? It should be required that everyone work an election in their lives, because you do see how not only how dedicated everyone there is, but also how a conspiracy to corrupt even one precinct means you have to get everyone in that precinct in on the game, unless there's a hack or something like that. What concerns you most about the midterms?
You've spoken of my theory of life, which is that everyone should have to wait tables at least once in their lifetime, totally. And everyone should be a poll worker. For the midterms, I think part of the challenge is we just don't know what's going to happen. Redistricting has been a lot of fun. Seems like it's mostly done and dusted at this point. Florida, I don't know, but they do have a constitutional prohibition on what they would like to do. So all those changes make more work for election officials. You have to redraw the districts, and you have to make sure the ballots have all the right contests for that particular district. But I have concerns about changing of rules too close to an election. Election officials are really busy right now preparing for upcoming elections. They don't need someone coming in like in Wayne County trying to take their 2024 ballots. Those are in storage. They're busy working on the upcoming, election work and recruiting poll workers and all of those things. And they don't need those things making it harder for them, but they also don't need rule changes about mail-in ballots or, something like the SAVE Act at the federal level, or the SAVE Act Light, I guess you would call it, at state levels, right? Those kinds of rule changes are challenging and hard, and you have to notify voters about the changes as best you can. And that's all hands on deck kind of an effort if that happens. Another thing that I think worries some people is, will there be uniforms at polling places, right? And I think there are remedies for some of these things. We may not be able to control the chaos that's coming down at us, but election officials are generally ready for anything. They're very prepared. They have a plan B. They have a plan C in case plan B doesn't work out. But what voters need to do is to have their own plans. And I think there are a number of steps voters can take. One of those steps, I think, is, a potential remedy for the idea that, maybe they're going to put ICE at polling places or something along those lines, and that is to vote early, right? In my state of California, we have a lot of options for voters, and that's great. Not everybody has quite as many options, but we can vote early. We can vote early in person. We can vote absentee. Everybody gets a mail-in ballot who is a registered voter. So you can do that at your kitchen table. You can take it into a polling place and vote it there. You can take it to a drop box. There's so many choices. But the vote early part is the key, because you might be able to, I don't know, cover some polling places with uniforms on a given day, but when you have multiple days and multiple polling places and vote centers that'll serve anybody in the county, you can go to a different one if yours looks, dicey. That's a real saving grace. And there are other things that voters can do and steps they can take, which I think are really important. Because of possible changes in registration, and even just generally, always check your registration. Check it well in advance before there's any deadline for changing the registration or updating it or whatever in your state. Check it, make sure it still says the correct information. If it doesn't, let the election official know there could have been a problem with that database, and you're telling them as sort of a canary in the coal mine if they need to know that. And it lets you make sure that you're ready for election day. The second thing is check your ballot. When you go to vote, if you're voting on a machine, which does print out a paper ballot, your focus still is on the machine. It's on that screen, right, as you're going through the choices. And a lot of people don't pay any attention to that printed thing that comes out at the end. That printed thing is not like your receipt in a grocery store. That's your ballot. It's really important. That's the thing that will get used in recounts and audits. That's the evidence of your intent. So you should look at it, check it carefully, make sure it says what you want it to. If it doesn't, you have a right to start over on a machine that is working, as long as you haven't cast it yet. So that's the most important thing to check. If you're voting by mail, use ballot tracking. If it's available in your state, and almost every state now has ballot tracking. And ballot tracking tells you when your ballot's on its way to you. It tells you when they've received your ballot, and it tells you when they've included it in the count. And this is like the greatest thing since sliced bread for anybody who's voting by mail. Knowing that it's there is crucially important. If you vote by mail, bank your vote early. Get it in a drop box if you can. If you can't, mail it as early as you can, but ballot tracking will let you know that it got back safely. And if it's a few days before the election and it's not checked in yet, then contact your election official for what your alternate options are. So those are just some of the things that voters can do, besides the all-important showing up to vote. One way to be sure your vote won't count is not to show up. And, you can volunteer for things like election protection. Right? The 1-866 Our Vote hotline helps voters be able to counter any problems, deal with any issues in real time on election day and in early voting. And they always need volunteers, or volunteer to be a poll worker, which we talked about. All of those things are ways that we all get together and safeguard our democracy.
Pam, I think all of us want to make sure that our elections are fair, safe, and secure. Yeah. But with a lot of these changes that we've been seeing debated at the federal and state level, not only does this make it very difficult for election workers who are public servants, and there are a lot of volunteers that are part of this process, but it also seems to put a lot of responsibility and pressure on voters. And voting is a right and a responsibility. And so that makes sense. But is part of the intent of some of these laws is to make voting a more onerous process, and for this to be a measure of voter suppression?
I think so. I think it's, trying to carve away at the margins, right? I think it only works, though, when you expect close margins. There's an enthusiasm gap, I think, that's significant. Does that same game plan play out under these circumstances? I don't know. I think Americans really want people to play by the rules, generally, and they don't take well to changing rules in the middle of a game. But if you do change the rules in the middle of the game, then expect the other side to play with the new rules. And we've seen that with the redistricting fights, and I think voters are ready for that. In the same way that they've shown themselves ready in, say, Minneapolis with the surge. They're ready for the kinds of things that can be brought upon them. But I really think this is an interesting time that we're in. I don't know that these kinds of trying to chip away at the edges is going to work. I think it may even drive more enthusiasm. It should not be this hard. It should never be this hard. You shouldn't have to wait in a long line. You shouldn't have to drive a really long distance to get to vote, or in some cases to have to do a new registration because they've changed the rules, right? Those things should not be so burdensome on voters. In an ideal world, we're making it easier than ever for voters. And I think some states have the right idea, and those voters who live in those states are lucky to be living in those states. But it's not so easy for folks who are not in a state that's already doing many of those right things. Just as an example, some states give you notification if mailed in your ballot and somehow you forgot to sign the envelope, or you did some other thing that needs to be cured, needs to be fixed. The election official in my state will notify you, and they'll give you options on how you can get that fixed. And in other states, they give you 36 hours from the close of polls to cure any problems that might exist. Sorry, but that's not a cure period. It just, even if how do you find out that it needs to be fixed in that span of time, much less get in there to be able to fix it. So I think that there are different circumstances facing voters, but I do think that some of these more onerous rules are going to do the opposite of what people think. I think they're going to drive participation and drive people to say, nope, don't mess with my vote. It's mine.
Go ahead, Susan.
Oh, we've, kind of carrying over from our previous discussion, we've seen a lot of election workers have been subject to threats. We saw this with the 2020 election in particular, but this is an ongoing problem. And a lot of these people, they're your local clerks and election officials who don't make a lot of money and don't consider themselves to be partisans. They're just literally trying to make sure that elections run fairly and that they're doing their job. And yet they've been kind of foisted into this national discussion with highly charged rhetoric. And what can we do to tamp down the rhetoric and to make sure that the people who are responsible for our election machinery out there and just, making sure that your vote counts, that they're not the target of these huge threats that we're seeing all over the place?
Yeah, it's such a challenge. And I know election officials who have, been sort of forced to retire
Right.
By these kinds of circumstances, not because they want to, they really want to do this job. And most of them do it, as you say, because of a love of democracy and a love of being part of that infrastructure, this kind of amazing thing that happens where across the country, everyone on the same day is doing the same thing and they're making it happen. I think one of the most important things we can do, if we're not the ones, with that charged rhetoric saying, you're doing it wrong, you're some kind of criminal, or this is treason, or all of those silly things, I think, is to invite people who may be saying that to sign up to be a poll worker. Because honestly, once you're on the inside, you see how elections work. And it's often quite different from how you imagined it. So we've seen people who, there was a lot of confusion about drop boxes and were they somehow legitimate or not. And there was an election official who invited people to go on ride-alongs to watch how they do the pickups from the drop boxes and to observe the whole procedure. And at the end of it, a couple of people who had started out very skeptical were saying, listen, we'll bring you donuts tomorrow and count us in as volunteers. Like they suddenly totally understood that there was nothing nefarious going on here at all. So knowledge is power. And it's really essential because people don't know that much about how elections work, right? They don't know that much about kind of what happens behind the scenes. And elections are run pretty transparently. You can observe most of the process going on. But I think, why would we expect people to know so much about election administration? They only interact with elections once every so often. So we just ask people to ask your election official. They're the source of the information about how elections are run in your jurisdiction. Ask them, and they will provide you with the answers.
Yeah, when I was working, it was a off-season election, so it was a little slower, and but a guy came in and he was not in the right precinct at all, and he got really mad. And he was a younger guy, and you could tell he was kind of a little MAGA-y, and so he had this sort of he felt locked out, right, of the process. And he said that the elections in this country are unfair and they're fake anyway. And he was doing a lot of that rhetoric. And I am concerned about that rhetoric that you've talked about already a little bit, but disseminating the idea that our elections are not only unfair, but they aren't for you, right? And I think policy like SAVE Act and other legislation going forward to keep people even further locked out is only reinforcing that feeling of us not having access to elections. Elections are for other people. How do we fight back against that kind of messaging and that sort of it really is a fire hose of mis and disinformation?
Yeah, it really is. And there are, you can follow groups like yours. There are a number of groups that provide really sound information. And I think that, at our website, one of the things we do is to provide publicly available information that everyone can use. For example, a map called the verifier. You can see the little link for it there on that front page. The verifier map shows you what kind of voting system is in use in your jurisdiction, right? And it also gives you information about how to contact your local election official and even your state election official. It tells you if there's audits happening in your jurisdiction. It tells you if you'd happen to find an electronic poll book in your jurisdiction. All of these things are sort of basic and fundamental, but it's useful to know and to see kind of the national map when you're hearing stories about something that's happening here or there in given jurisdictions. And you can actually see kind of the big picture. It is hard when people are hearing messaging that generates doubt. It's very corrosive. What we would like is to get back to a place or forward to a place, I will say, where people have a greater understanding about elections, and I think have reasons to understand why they should trust an election. If you're not sure about the vote count, you can actually observe ballot processing. You can observe a post-election audit, the check on the count that's taking place in your jurisdiction. You can even observe pre-election testing of the machines in your jurisdiction. There are a lot of things that you can do to avail yourself of that transparency if you have the doubt. But I think what's most important is getting to that space where we understand, look, there's evidence of your intent. You have a physical ballot, you checked it. Now they're going to use that to check the overall count and make sure it's right. That's what these processes are for. And that's the foundation that we need. And, this is where we are today. Now it's a case of people understanding that's what's actually happening.
I agree. And I think, we talk about the spread of mis and disinformation. I think and we talk about, if you're a voter who's confused, then find the resources and they're available here and there. But if you're a voter who's not confused, be a spreader of information, not mis or dis, but be the spreader. And I think that this is, a thing that the folks in our audience who, you guys already know this stuff. We're kind of preaching to the choir. Your job now is to take this information and spread it in your community, to your neighbors, find those people who are confused or who don't know their resources and get them those resources.
Yeah. And one of your listeners commented, maybe it should be like jury duty, like make people do this.
Yes.
Maybe so, but I think, it's a good thing to volunteer. Thanks, Amy, out there. I think it's a really good thing to volunteer your services and be part of the process. And, if you can, with states that do early voting, that means they need even more poll workers because it's over a longer period of time, right? It's not just one day. So maybe you can do it for part of that time, even if not the whole time. So engage.
Engage. Audience, I'm counting on you. I want to hear your stories. Go volunteer, or you get, a lot of people get paid to be poll workers, so you can get a little extra income. You meet new people. It's really fun. You get to see
they may have donuts.
They have
and if not, bring them. Look, I also think if people call the hotline, the election protection hotline, they can get information about specific rules in their state, right?
And
if you're not sure quite where to find it, 1-866-OUR-VOTE. It's a way that you can prepare yourself ahead of time. If they don't answer immediately, leave a message, they'll get back to you and give you how you can get that info.
Pam, can you tell us some other resources that people can access from your group as we're heading into this crucial election season?
Sure. Well, we have a section on our website that is about post-election audits. And, audits, not a very user-friendly term, but this is a really important part of our elections. And what it means is, when you vote on your paper ballot and it gets collected with all the other paper ballots and it gets counted by a machine, there is a process for checking that the machines were working the way they were expected to. And if not, it gives you evidence that you can then use for a challenge or a recount of some kind. And audits are great. There's a whole section at our website. There's a small video that's about 90 seconds long that you can access that tells you about a really robust form of audits called risk limiting audits that really limit the risk of any wrong outcome standing. And that's one thing that I would recommend folks do. And we have a get involved page and so on. So there's a variety of things you can, if you do go to the map and you want to say, oh, what kind of equipment are we going to be using in my jurisdiction, in my county? You can drill right down to the county level. And once you see what kind of equipment is listed there, it's a clickable link, and that will take you to a page that actually explains how that all works. It'll have images of the machine and it'll describe the process. So it's really, very information rich. So if you have a little time, you can dig around in there.
That's really helpful. Pam, thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate hearing from you.
Yeah, and thanks for your work. It's really remarkable. We've got to have you back.
Thanks. We'd love to come back.
So good. So good.
Yeah.
Class Assist Reader, which, by the way, terrific YouTube handle. She says, my late mother was a poll worker and she showed such diligence and honest. It forever has lived with me. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing when you hear the highly charged rhetoric out there, really our election system is based on volunteers. It's based on you. You keep it all going. And so the more that you can get involved in the process, the better things will work.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we got a big week, Susan. And I want to just kick off by saying Friday is May Day. Big day. It is the No Kings Every time I forget what it's called. The general strike.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to hear what y'all are doing. So when we post this or in the Lincoln Square chat, let us know. Are you going to take work off? Are you stopping your shopping? Are you discontinuing your Amazon account? What are you doing? That's what I want to hear.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's coming up very quick. And so we definitely want to hear from you. And Sam, you have a really important guest, Sarah Nelson of Union Now, and she has been pushing for this with the Flight Attendants Union for months, and now we're finally seeing it come to pass. So that will be coming up this week. That will be a great discussion.
Yeah, I'm very excited for that. And, Andrew Watkins is another who's been talking about, she's like, look, if you're still shopping at Amazon or if you're still, giving the oligarchs and the fascists your money, I don't know what you're doing. And I think that I as a dad who, I work hard, my wife works hard, we have very little time. I understand the value of convenience, but there's going to be a time when we have no other choice. Right? So do it while you can, while you have access to services, while you have all the things you need. And it's a little easier to do it now than it is going to be, in the coming years.
We also have our friend Olivia Troy, who will be stopping back. She will be on Frank Figluzzi's show on Wednesday. Olivia, of course, worked for Mike Pence during the first Trump administration and resigned in protest. Now she's one of the many people we know who are running for Congress. So looking forward to hearing from her.
Yeah, two of my favorites, Frank and Olivia. Love them both.
Also, a guest that you probably remember that we've had on many times, Mrs. Frazzled. She's a former teacher who writes a fabulous Substack. She's been on with Maya May several times. She will be back on with Maya May. And you probably heard her name because she was one of the people who broke the Eric Swalwell story. And so we will get to hear right from her directly on that.
Yeah, she is the absolute example of how to behave, right? Of doing the scary thing, of standing up to power. She was a Swalwell supporter. She had him on her show, and then the comments started coming in, and she couldn't ignore it, and she changed. And I mean, it's really a remarkable story. She does incredible work, not just on Swalwell, but on education. You got to watch.
Yep. I have a really fun show for First Draft. If you're like me, you have read Wonkette for years. They are incredibly funny over there. They take the absurdist times that we're in and they skewer them to perfection. And Rebecca Schoenkoff, who is also now a Michigander like me, she has been running Wonkette for years, fabulous writer. She's the editrix over there. And I think it should be a lot of fun on First Draft.
That's amazing. Is it really editrix?
That's what she calls herself. Which
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. Great. And we'll probably have much more this week, so stay tuned. Sam, thanks as always for being here. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. I hope the week gets even better for you.
For all of us.
Yes.
Because it didn't start out very well.
No, my God. Thanks, Susan. Appreciate it.